Mariam, do you want to introduce? I think I
Yeah,
missed you.
Mariam.
Okay. Hi. I'm Mariam Ispahani, and I am a climate tech entrepreneur. I have a startup, and we're solving the plastic pollution problem. So always excited to talk about that space. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining. Okay, let's start on defining whether net zero. What is net zero? And today's topic is whether net zero is a reality, is it doable? So here, Harsha Saxena from IICSR, she will be defining what exactly net zero is. She'll giving the preliminary terminologies, and we'll kickstart with this one. Harsha, do you want to come?
So I have a very small presentation, but I have good videos that I can show to you all. And I think so that will, and I want it more engaging. So we have kept books and pens out there. So you all can grab one book and pen and make notes or write what would be your initiative towards net zero and how would you like to achieve it? So what is your to-do list?
We've all heard about climate.
Whenever you all are ready.
And now everyone's talking about reaching net zero. But how are they related? Let's start with the problem. Climate change has been triggered by an excess of greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide and methane, in the Earth's atmosphere. These gases trap the heat from the sun, which warms our planet even more. We're already seeing the effects through more extreme weather and melting polar ice contributing to rising sea levels. And this will only get worse if our planet's temperature continues to grow. One way we can all help is to do our bit to get to net zero. But what exactly is net zero? Think about running a bath. Turn on the taps and water is added. Pull out the plug and water flows out. To keep the water at the same level, you need to ensure what you put in and what you take out is balanced. Reaching net zero works in a similar way. We need to balance the amount of greenhouse gases we put into the atmosphere with the amount we take out. What we do to limit emissions in the next decade is critical to our future. From countries and companies to families and individuals, we can all play a role in our journey to net zero, which will help slow climate change.
So I hope that gives a fair idea about net zero. Would anyone of y'all like to share about what did you understand from this video? What would you mean by it? It's not that difficult.
Like a bathtub analogy.
Yeah. So it gives a good perspective what you're putting in, how do you get that out. So you would be glad to learn that there are about 145 countries who have signed up for being net zero. That includes India, China, US, and Europe. And we all have set our targets, not only at the country level, but also at the industry level. And each one has different percentages of GHG emissions, which they need to negate or balance out. So you cannot get rid of total carbon emissions. Whatever you're emitting, you need to balance out by either plantation or by buying carbon credits or different ways. I believe Christian will speak more on this, how they are doing it. So my first question to you is, so who according to you is responsible for achieving the results of net zero? Is it just the corporates? Is it the government? Is it the NGOs? Or are we equally responsible in the entire process? So
Everyone.
Yeah, maybe let each one of us write our own versions. So is it a shared value and shared responsibility? And how can net zero be really reached?
Climate change as a new poster boy. Companies from British Airways to Facebook and pop artists like Billie Eilish and Massive Attack have promised to make changes to bring their greenhouse gas emissions closer to net zero. They're joining a club of more than 50 countries around the world. This race to zero is a vital step towards managing climate change. But what does net zero really mean? And is achieving it even possible? Net zero has gone viral. But like all simple slogans, the reality of achieving it is far more complicated. Humans burning fossil fuels has resulted in more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is warming the planet. To stop the warming, the level of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere has to stop rising. The obvious way to do that is to stop emitting them, but that's easier said than done. For some industries, such as aviation and manufacturing, eliminating emissions is really hard. In the years leading up to the Copenhagen Climate Conference in 2009, scientists realized something. It wasn't possible to cut emissions fast and thoroughly enough to meet the temperature targets that policymakers wanted. What was needed was to actively remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere too. People began to talk about a world in which greenhouse gas emissions and greenhouse gas removals balanced each other out, so that the overall effect was net zero. The countries that signed up to the Paris Agreement pledged to turn this idea into reality by agreeing to balance their emissions and removal of greenhouse gases in the second half of the century.
To achieve net zero emissions, we need to do two things. One, which is more obvious, is to cut our output of greenhouse gas emissions from things like burning fossil fuels. But the other is actually to take emissions out of the air. And that's the harder and sometimes more obscure aspect of getting to net zero.
This is known as negative emissions, and the scale on which they might be required is one reason that net zero targets will be hard to achieve.
We'll need to go from a world economy that pumps out on the order of 40 billion tons of CO2 a year to one that sucks down, that is, removes billions of tons per year in the future to get to that net zero future. There's different ways to do this. Forests do this naturally through biological processes or sinks, but what we're really looking at now to achieve ambitious climate targets are man-made approaches.
Some methods for removing greenhouse gases from the atmosphere are already being used at scale, such as the planting of new forests and improving soil so it can store more carbon. But there are new technologies at a much earlier stage of development. Among them, ways of capturing carbon dioxide and storing it underground. Carbon dioxide could be pulled directly from the air by machines or by growing plants, burning them to generate electricity, and then capturing the carbon dioxide as they burn.
There's a flurry of innovation in negative emissions technologies, a range of ambitious to wacky, and none of them are proven at scale. And that's what makes them so problematic. The world is counting on innovations that have not yet been demonstrated at scale to achieve targets that we're setting for ourselves. And that's a big question mark. We're hopeful, but it is still a risky bet.
How much greenhouse gas needs to be removed from the atmosphere will depend on how much emissions can be cut.
The conundrum. That is, we need both massive reductions in emissions as well as a dramatic scale up and proving of the technologies for negative emissions. There is a tension between the two, and it's easy for governments and industries to kick the can down the road, saying, well, let's go a little slower on the cutting of emissions now, which will be better for the economy or for our profits, because we can always make massive negative emissions reductions later when innovation makes those technologies cheaper and better. The dirty little secret in that argument is that it may come too late. And it may well give permission for polluters to get away with polluting much more than need be, rather than innovating ways to reduce emissions now.
There's also the question of who takes responsibility for each molecule of greenhouse gas.
One of the most difficult challenges is that lots of countries and companies and individuals don't want to own up to their carbon footprint. For example, carbon intensive countries like India, China, other emerging markets that are producing enormous amounts of emissions today, they point out that the goods they produce, for example, may be consumed by Americans or Europeans. So they should do the negative emissions. Or they may say, rich countries got rich putting carbon dioxide into the air. Now it's our turn to lift our people out of poverty. So you pay for the negative emissions.
As yet, there is no universal policy for accounting for and attributing emissions. Today, governmental net zero pledges cover over 2/3 of the global economy. America and the EU are working towards a target of net zero by 2050. And President Xi of China, the world's largest emitter, has pledged to achieve carbon neutrality before 2060.
Some people see ambitious climate targets and say, fantastic, the problem's getting solved. Here's the problem. A target is no guarantee that we're going to get to the goal. It's important to have targets. It binds society together. It gives you a direction in which policy is going to go. It gives investors and markets some idea and some degree of certainty as to what investments to make. However, we often fall short of targets also, we should remember.
Most government policies focus on cutting emissions rather than how to tackle negative emissions.
Embracing, enacting, and scaling a negative emissions plan to get to net zero is a Herculean task. This is something far bigger than, say, the moonshot or other initiatives that it's often compared to, because this involves really every economy on Earth, every government, ultimately every citizen. All of us have to be involved and change the way we live. And it's not just a technological revolution, we need a revolution in our mindsets. I'm VJ by this one.
So this
Climate
makes
change
us
has a
think,
new poster boy.
what are you going to do in order to contribute towards being net zero as an individual yourself? So if you would like to write down what would be your initiative, because governments and the corporations and the NGOs, they are all doing something or the other. What are we doing as an individual? At this note, I would just like to say a brief about our organization. So we have been in this space since 2010. We have been running masters in ESG, masters in CSR and sustainability, postgraduate programs in Asia, covering Southeast Asia. We are accredited by the Ministry of Skills Development and Entrepreneurship and American Council of Training and Development. We have trained more than 10,000 corporate professionals till date. Has anybody been to Goa till date in the audience? Goa, India? No? Okay, so I'm gonna take you guys over there. That's where our campus is. And you will see small snippets from our people out there.
I am the master of ceremony here at IICSR, and I can't wait to have you here to learn together how to learn sustainability and make this planet better. Come to see how beautiful is the place where you're going to be. I would take to be a more inclusive. That's why I joined IICSR.
Hi, I'm Veenu Tiwari. I have joined ISCSR postgraduate course on CSR and sustainability. I wanted to learn about ESG, CSR, and SDGs. ISCSR has the best faculty for this course.
Starting what index today, it's the worst possible air quality index. That's really too much, and we all have to do something to climate change.
We all want to build a sustainable and inclusive world, and ISCSR is the only place which is training you. Come join us.
this is a glimpse of where we are coming from. And we have a beach campus, so we all would like to welcome you all whenever we conduct a session out there. Apart from that, we are conducting a couple of courses in the US, ESG strategy. It's an online course, 18 to 22nd March, 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. again on Zoom. You can find our brochure. We'll circulate the presentations post the session. And you can also have a discount coupon, 20% discount on sustainability dialogues if you put. And if you want to join the movement, these are our social media links. You can, yes. I'll send you the one that we have started. I'll send you the one. Thank you so very much. Really appreciate. Any questions? Maybe we can take after the once panel discussions are there. Or if you all have any questions right now. Okay, Christian.
So now we will welcome Christian Butzlaff from SAP. He's the Chief Sustainability Architect there with 20 years of experience on various software business development. Christian, just go ahead and share your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I don't have a long presentation, but can you open the presentation? But I mean, that campus look beautiful, so students, sign up for that. So just briefly to my person, right? I'm a Chief Sustainability Solution Architect for SAP in North America. So I'm part of the go-to-market organization, bringing our solutions to market, specifically in the context of sustainability. So our solutions help customers, more mainly corporate clients, to become more sustainable. But this talk here, it will not be about that. So it's not a sales presentation. What I want to talk about is what are we doing as a company, as an organization, in the context of net zero. So sustainability, just before we get there, yeah, sustainability is a broad topic, right? So you talked about plastic. So, we have plastic taxes in England and Spain, for instance, right? So companies have to help they reduce their plastic in the packaging. So I will not talk about these kind of things. I will really only focus mainly on what we are doing, and then on the topic of net zero. So, can you go? Does that work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to
Let's
go?
go. Yeah, thank you. How do I get that done? Here we go. So which one did you press?
This, right?
Yes, sure, listen. Yeah, so very briefly as a like an overview, right? Because we come from a corporation. So from our goal, at SAP, so I don't know who knows what SAP is. Not everyone always knows that. Actually, I'm sometimes getting asked whether I'm a hockey player. So for those who are not from here, right? So we have the Sharks here, right? So SAP is sponsoring the Sharks. Our co-founder Harsha owns the Sharks at the SAP Arena. So I'm getting asked, are you a hockey player? Not really. Anyway, so we are basically big ERP software provider. Most of the companies run our software somewhere in order to run their business, run their finance, run their logistics, and so on. So that's who we are. And our basic purpose is help the world run better and improve people's lives. From that perspective, we bring things down also on the sustainability side. And on the sustainability side, we have basically two things. So on the one hand side, we are an enabler. So we are helping others to become more sustainable. We're helping our clients, our customers, to become more sustainable, to run their business more sustainable. But at the same time, we are also a corporation, right? So we also want to be sustainable. So in this presentation, I will mainly only talk about ourselves as an exemplar, as a company who is also wants to become a sustainable company. And we are, like other corporations also, we are publishing a report. We are publishing a combined integrated report. I will not go too much into that, which combines finance and sustainability. And for those of you who are interested, there is the link. So let's look a little bit into what are we doing as a company, as an exemplar, to become sustainable. And we started quite early, and I don't want to go through each of these milestones, but we started in 2009 to really look into, how can we become a sustainable company? What is our goals? How can we reduce our carbon footprint? We have buildings here in Palo Alto at Hillview. We started to install the first solar panels there in 2009. And then over the years, right, we enhanced this program more and more. Last year, 2023, we just finished that year. We became carbon neutral in our own operations. What does that mean? So that means in our facilities, in our everything which is inside of SAP, so not related to our suppliers or our customers. We'll talk about that in a second. We in our own corporation, we became carbon neutral, which includes obviously also buying some carbon credits, which is problematic. Because there's a lot of discussion about is that real, is that greenwashing, right? How good are the credits? So we are doing a lot of work to really have a good portfolio. But our goal is to really become net zero by 2030, which is not far in the future, right? So that's 6 years from now. We had, I think last year we moved that date from 2050 to 2030. So we basically said we will be ready. We try to be ready already in 6 years from now. And so that's where we are right now. Our CEOs, our board is also compensated in sustainability KPIs. So it's not just really talk. They will feel it in their pocket if we don't make it. So what does it mean to become net zero, right? What does actually net zero mean? Oops. Okay, so I have a little bit of a problem here with your computer. Yeah. That's yeah.
So you press this one is working.
Yes. Okay.
Thanks.
So what does net zero mean? So we saw the video, right, about with the bathtub. Basically, net zero is a state where the greenhouse gases going into the atmosphere are balanced by removal out of the atmosphere. So that's a very generic definition. So from SAP, this kind of what is also how we define it. So we want to make sure that all the emissions which we somehow produce and move into the atmosphere are also getting removed, which includes for net zero not only what we as a company emit, it's also about what we buy and also our customers emitting in terms of using our products. So think about it. So we are a software company, right? Our customers are running their software in the old world on premise on their computers. Their computers are using energy, right? Electricity. So we want to make sure that if they use our software, that this is also net zero. And I will come in a second to how we want to make that work. If you look at other companies, if you look at Microsoft or Apple, they also look into how can they evaluate what is the carbon footprint of our usage of their products, right, of their computers. So we work with the SBTi, science-based targets. So they will also really kind of evaluate what we are doing in terms of how we want to get a net zero. So that is basically a credible and independent evaluation of the how corporations are setting net zero targets. So they will evaluate that. So they want to make sure that targets are aligned with the 1.50 global warming limit. And they want to make sure that that whatever the corporations do is not greenwashing, really has some meat behind it. We are a member of them since 2017. And again, we are planning to be net zero by 2030. So if you want to, and I want to only have limited time, but if you really want to dig into that for the students who have a right, so we just had a blog here by Daniel Schmidt, who is our Chief Sustainability Officer, in terms of our journey to net zero in 2030. So this is a link for anyone who's interested to read more about it. So let me talk a little bit about how do we want to achieve that, right? So this is a list of our main main initiatives, and they are divided basically into 3 areas. So the first area is cloud transformation. So again, we are a software company, right? So we provide software to our clients. Our clients in the past, they run this on their machines. We don't really have control over where they buy the electricity from, right? Whether it's green in the electricity or not. So we have a major transformation of moving all of the software into the cloud. That has many reasons why we're doing that, but among them, it also has the benefit that once it runs on the cloud, once it runs on our data centers, and we have control over where the energy comes from, which runs the data center. And there's also a lot of efficiency gain. So transforming, all of these installations into the cloud is part of our strategy to really become net zero. And it's part of for those who have looked into the greenhouse gas protocol, right? It's part of the scope 3 emissions usage of products. So we really work on that. Then once we have that, then we really have also control over where we get the energy from. So we really want to make sure that we have 100% renewable energy running the data centers. But also we are working, the customers are not only running their software in our data centers, they also run on so-called hyperscalers. So that is, the Google Cloud, that's the Azure, Microsoft, that's AWS. So we work with those providers so that they also run when, an SAP customer runs the software on those clouds, that they use renewable energy. So we work very closely with those hyperscalers to make sure that they also run renewable energy. And of course, we do a lot of kind of see how can we reduce like air conditioning, cooling, how can we make that efficient. The last point on this bullet, but it's also kind of an interesting one, is how can we reduce the usage of the energy of the software itself, right? So its software uses CPU, right? And the more CPU it uses, the more energy it uses, the more greenhouse gas emissions we might have if we don't have renewable energy powering that. So we have to make sure that we want to build the software in a way that we minimize the usage of CPU. So that's really part of how the software is built. And that's kind of what we're also doing in building our software to make sure that we have that optimized from an energy consumption perspective. So that's a cloud transformation. The next thing is our supply chain. So this basically, what are we buying? So we're not a manufacturer in this sense, right? So we don't have a lot of raw materials which we are buying, which would fall under greenhouse gas scope 3.1. But there are a lot of things we do buy. So we do buy cars. So in Germany, all of our employees have basically a company car. So we talk about tens of thousands of cars. So we are really moving all of these cars, the whole car fleet, to become an electrical fleet, which is a major undertaking, right? It also includes we need all the charging stations. Someone talked about charging stations here, right? So we have to convert the charging station. We have the charging station infrastructure. We have to manage that. We have to make sure that we get renewable energy into the charging stations, which is a challenge in Germany because a lot of the energy comes from coal plants. So all of that, we have to kind of work on all of that in order to get the car fleet, green. Obviously, then there are other things like business travel. That's has a lot of issues, cost issue, obviously also, but there's a lot of flight going on. But if I go, particularly in Europe, if I try to book a business travel, let's say in Germany from, we have a German colleague there, right, from Munich to Hamburg, and I'll say I will fly there, then the tool will tell me, why don't you take the train, right? So it will not prevent me from booking it because maybe there's a business reason why I have to be there in 2 hours or so, but it will ask me and to say, oh, isn't it better to take the train, right? So really kind of trying to also reduce the emissions there. The next thing here is enhancement investment in new technologies. So when we talk about net zero, it was also mentioned in the video. It's basically about on the one hand side, reducing the amount of emissions which we bring into the atmosphere, right? So we want to make that as small as possible. Well, we will not make it zero because we will still have to do something will remain there, right? And then we don't want to continue with the carbon credits, but we invest in technology in which helps kind of to then pull really carbon out of the atmosphere, right? So that's part of our investment, which which we can then also net against the remaining residual carbon footprint which we might have. So last not least, our own operations, right? So we have, I already talked about the car fleet, but we have obviously office buildings here in Palo Alto. I mentioned that, right? So we have they all run on green energy there, you know, across the world, we have offices pretty much everywhere. So we have to really make sure that they are green. Yeah, so that's what we do as a, you know, to really become net zero by 2030. That's kind of what I wanted to share. Hopefully this was helpful, and you're welcome.
So guys,
Sure. Yeah, sorry, question.
Can you talk a little bit about, from the corporate perspective, the incentives or the penalties of beating your target or not beating your target, whether this is internal, whether it's government, whether it's you're just good guys? You know, what, you know, because some companies may not have the same mentality, the same board type of board that you have. What is pushing the whole, you know, corporate world to adopt, you know, a mindset that it seems that you've adopted?
So, do you still, can you click to button? So there's a longer answer to this question. So, let me start first. Let's say take it personal, right? Me as an employee in our company, I don't get more money or don't have any, you know, direct incentive to become more sustainable. Other than the tool, when I do a business travel, will tell me, oh, you really need that, or you wanted to have a train, right? But my personal salary doesn't depend on that. As I had earlier in the one slide there, our board does have KPIs, and their compensation depends on it. Other organizations I have talked to, they're more strict than that, right? They really have carbon footprint targets on cost centers, and they really say, well, in this like a budget on a cost center, right? Think of a financial budget on a cost center. This is how much money you can spend. So they also really, what they do is they take the carbon footprint, they multiply that with the internal price, right, and then manage that in the same way than other budgets, right? So you have a budget as a manager on your cost center for a certain amount of carbon footprint. So that means you might still have travel budget left over, but maybe you don't have carbon budget left over anymore, so you will not be able to travel. So other corporations are more stricter than that. So we don't have that internally, like on the individual cost center yet. But from the corporate level, our board is compensated by it. Now the other part of the.
But what if you go one step higher? What's incentivizing the board?
Yeah, so I wanted to get there. That's what I wanted to get. So if you look into corporate sustainability reporting so far, that was mainly voluntary, right? So if you look like 15 years ago, everyone had to bring out, just say, the green brochure, right? But there was no, you had to do it, you had to look good, that's it, right? So, but this is changing in multiple ways. On one hand side, we see that investors are looking at companies to see, you know, what is the sustainable risk, for instance. Do they have a factory which has a risk of being flooded because it's close to the ocean, and because of, you know, the rising ocean level, there's a risk to it. That is a financial risk to that company, and so investors are looking into that. What is the risk in terms of child labor? So sustainability is not only carbon, right? It's way broader. Is this company in this industry exposed to potential threats coming from that area? So investors are looking into companies to really be mindful in terms of their sustainable footprint, and you know, and money follows that. Now the other thing to that is also from a regulatory perspective. So, you know, in the past, you know, corporations, almost every corporation brings out a sustainability report, and then they use certain frameworks like GRI, SASB, and so on to report on that. This was all kind of voluntary. It's all good, it's not bad. But what we see now is that more and more, particularly coming out of Europe, that we see regulatory requirements, right? So in California, we just had 2 new laws, right, being signed by our government, which will require companies to report on their greenhouse gas emissions, Scope 1, 2, 3. If they don't comply, they might have to pay a fine, right? In Europe, it's a little bit ahead from that, right? We have more kind of reporting requirements, but if you look at the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, CSRD directive, which there was a Wall Street Journal article that probably up to 3,000 companies in the US will be required to report on the CSRD, which is a European regulation. Why? Because they have a subsidiary in Europe, or they have major business in Europe, or certain rules which require them to be compliant and report based on these rules. And that starts 2020, I think it was just moved out by a year or so, but it starts 2025 or 2026. So very recent. So companies really have to look into that now, right? And then the other thing is that things like carbon border adjustment mechanism, right? Where if you import into European Union, you have to show what is your carbon footprint, and you might have to pay a tax on it. So if you, and then I've finished that, but so if you look into a corporation and if you look at their corporate sustainability report and you look into what is their carbon footprint, Scope 1, Scope 2, only the internal, right? Scope 1, 2, and 2, and you find something like, say, 50 million tons of carbon. Then multiply that with the price, let's say $100 per ton, something like that, right? And now we have more and more companies or countries and where they will tax you on the carbon. So this is a huge liability, which doesn't show up in the books of any company these days, right? So there's a potential huge risk and liability, and there was actually a study by Harvard, which is in the Harvard Business Review, which they basically pointed that out, that there's this this Damocles sword somehow hanging over the heads of corporations that if they don't reduce their carbon footprint, they might run a huge tax liability, which they are not even aware of. So I hope that answered your question a little bit.
Just a quick question on the measurement side of the thing, because all these different decisions, right, whether I'm taking a flight, taking a train, how much distance it is. This is one example, but there are so many examples. Are we running this on a hybrid or a cloud or a computer? So are there like softwares and tools that are actually able to measure the carbon footprint of all these activities?
So that's where we come in as an enabler, right? Where we help companies to really measure the carbon footprint, which they have. So, and that's also an interesting storyline there because so far currently what a lot of companies are doing, and that's totally allowed and legal based on the greenhouse gas protocol. They use so-called spend-based methods. They just look into when they buy something, average, right? What's the average carbon footprint of this type of product? But that will not be sufficient going forward. We really have to go down to really understand what is the carbon footprint of the purchase, for instance. So when I go out and if I buy something from a supplier, I want to know what is the price, and I don't want to know like what is the average market price of this kind of product. I want to know what is the exact price of this item which I'm buying from this supplier. And in the same way, I want to know exactly what is the carbon footprint of this item which I'm buying. So now, how do I measure that, right? How do I calculate that? So on one hand side, ultimately it goes down to looking into the manufacturing product of something I'm buying. So we see bigger corporations asking their suppliers to really provide them the footprint, and they then look into, okay, so how do I calculate my carbon footprint of my products I'm buying? So it starts all the way down, goes all the way down the supply chain, right? So what we have as an enabler, where we provide software which helps you to look into what is your manufacturing process, what are the individual activities in your manufacturing process, what is the electricity consumed in each of these steps, right? Ideally, I can measure that. If I cannot measure that, then I might work with some allocations or some plant values of run times of that machine. And then looking into, okay, so what comes in from the utility right? How much electricity comes in, and then really calculate the carbon footprint of the energy consumption of this manufacturing of this finished good, right? But at the same time, I look into, at my suppliers, to look into what is the footprint of the raw material I'm buying, right? So it goes down the supply chain, and then what is important is that there's an exchange between all the different business players to really exchange the carbon data in a standardized way, right? That people really know how to do it. So there are initiatives going on, and then I will stop there. From the automotive industry, for instance, in Germany, like Latina X, where they have this business network to share this information. There was one more question there.
Does that process also involve looking at different scopes, GHG scopes?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so it looks at all scopes. So it looks at your own in-house scopes, like scope 1, scope 2, but then it looks into the scope 3 emissions. So on one, what people mostly look at right now is scope 3.1, so what do I buy from the products I'm buying. But then also in terms of transportation, right, inbound, outbound transportation, 3.4 and 3.9. And then earlier I talked about product usage, right? And then we go all the way to end of life. That's where the plastic also comes in.
Awesome, thank you. So now I would like to have our panelists here. So you guys can ask more questions. So Christian, anybody joins with one panelist here from that. Harsha, and and Mr. Prakash Thakur, he's an impact entrepreneur, investor, and also sustainability advisor. He has around 15 years of experience. Prakash, you can introduce yourself more, and welcome to the panel.
Maybe she can sit on one of these and you can sit. Yeah, you have designed some interesting questions for us.
So yeah, we move with, like certain questions, and it will be open to the, like rest of everyone can ask questions. We'll go by that format. So, so yeah, Prakash, do you want to introduce yourself? I think we all have our introduction round except you. So yeah.
Yeah. So my background has been, I've been sort of a little bit bits and pieces here and there. So I started my career actually in as a medical technology expert, and I started working in healthcare and primarily in the bioengineering and life science technology sector. In academics, then I went to industry for a while, and I pursued an MBA, and then I realized when all those medical directors and surgeons from hospital are sitting on one side, PhD and MDs, and the MBAs and the CFOs of the company are coming and they're discussing about things, I just realized that nobody's in sync with each other. One side is making decision from bottom line, other side is making decision in terms of the patient centricity and or efficient care delivery. So I went to the business school, and one thing leads to another, that I got more intrigued about business of humanity, sustainability, the whole impact thing, because ultimately everything is connected. Like, as I think you were saying, and also you were saying also, what are we doing? And how are we as an individual contributing, right? So then I realized that even for a health outcome, all these things are related, like how we deal with environment, how we consume our, things around us. So when, I led a couple of startups, I CEO'd a couple of them, except one that I went to venture capital after a while, and then did a bit of impact investing. And I love to be associated with wherever there is a convergence of sustainability, net zero, with some overlap with health. So that's my primary background. So I try to draw some example that is something that's not often talked about, right? When we talk about sustainability, net zero, immediately people talk about, okay, plastic, people talk about energy, people talk about electricity bill, but we don't talk about hospitals, healthcare, life sciences, biotechnology, the food that we consume, stuff like that. So try to sort of give a spin around that and bring some diversity to that discussion.
Thank you so much, Prakash. And given that you've introduced, let me also tell me a little bit about myself, how I got introduced to this sustainability and this direction. So I was an engineering director at Intel, leading AI machine learning. I left Intel to build a Gen AI based product that I met. I was going to some climate sustainability events, and I met Harsha. And more and more I was delving into this direction. I felt if I have to build a Gen AI-based or a AI-based product, why not in the direction where it is very important and make a difference. That is when I joined Harsha and started thinking of building a product together. Here, two of the questions which I have for the panel is, like what specific measures can organization take to achieve net zero emissions? If we'll go to Kristen, maybe you can take those.
Yeah, I think I shared some of them.
Yeah,
already,
yeah,
right,
exactly. Then we can
in this slide,
have more
right?
discussion
So
on.
from our perspective, right, yeah, first of all, looking into starting, let's say when you start from the supply chain, right, start from where do you source your materials from, right? What is the carbon footprint of that sourcing? Make decisions also not only based on price, availability, and quality, but make your decision also based on the carbon footprint associated with that material. And then it comes to transportation, right? Make sure that maybe you have source something which is closer to where you are, so that you have less transportation. Continues with your production, manufacturing, right? Where do you get the energy from? From your utility, work with your utility provider. And then ultimately, like what we do, right, where we try to move everything into the cloud so that we can also reduce the footprint of the usage of the product.
Exactly. So SAP works with multiple clients from different directions, be it oil and gas to manufacturing. So like so you have like specific standards for each industry, how they can control on their carbon emissions, how they can control or the KPIs. Like is there a specific KPI for each of those industry or?
So we don't define the KPIs, right? They may be defined also by external standards, but there are industry-specific KPIs, like SASB has industry-specific metrics and KPIs, which companies are looking at from that specific industry, right? We are supporting all of them, pretty much generic across all of the industries. But we ourselves don't come up with our own KPIs. We are using those which are defined by standards organizations.
Thank you, Kristen. Prakash, do you want to tell something on the healthcare domain, like healthcare?
Yeah, I mean, in general, so basically, one other thing, at least in some of the hospital systems that I've worked with, what happens is it's primarily falls into scope 3 actually there, because for a hospital standpoint, people get really concerned that if you're not really keeping your MRI machine and ultrasound machine warm enough, heated enough, if something is supposed to be consuming energy, then it should consume that energy, because they immediately think mindset, oh, it's the hospital is not doing a good job, it's switching off its lighting or stuff like that. But what we actually miss is like I think there are studies that say about 5 to 10% of the greenhouse emissions that generally come from the healthcare facilities and centers, because they have to operate high energy equipments. For the most part, a lot of sensors and stuff like that. But it's the scope 3 usually. There is a lot of lever in hospital can really apply. And they actually try to outsource this to kind of measure. For example, where am I sourcing my syringes from? Where am I sourcing my aprons, lab coats, and consumables that I have to like throw every time I touch a patient? And who is supplying, who are the bulk supplier, how is their supply chain working, where are they manufacturing, just like you mentioned, right? So a lot of those awareness you might have come across during COVID, it became accentuated even more because of the supply chain disruption. People started to go, wow, we didn't know that even a simple cocktail of a vaccine or some preservative in medicine, actually there are 20 ingredients coming from China, one's coming from Brazil and stuff like that. And sometimes even the gloves and there's latex and stuff like that. There are issues in certain components because, of course, we're interdependent world, and not, I mean, the creator is intelligent enough to create this world in a way that there are resources. Certain resources are heavy in some parts, and certain resources are heavy in some other. So, for example, Indonesia, I think that produces just amount of rubber and latex, and most of them goes to the healthcare products, actually consumables. So some of those, like looking at how do we now think and measure those, and what are the alternatives available? Can we actually do something that doesn't need latex, and are there other alternative things? So that's one of the things I think the hospital systems are trying to evolve and measure. particularly Yale, I think has done a good job around it. They published a bunch of paper around it. And it's probably look at it.
I have a question for you. So when you talk about impact investment, how much prominence are you presently giving and will give to net zero companies?
Question to
It's to you.
Yeah, okay. So I think from an investor perspective, I think this is a question you should probably ask the big investor, or big business or big impact investment. At least I can tell from the training and landscape point of view, definitely it is getting a lot of traction. Mainly because you think a VC is always looking for ROI and creating a portfolio of 30 companies. And I'm hoping that, 2 or 3 will become a major hit. There will be 30x of the return. That's typically mindset of the VCs, and they know that it's a top world, the startup is a top world. Despite of all the best efforts and best technology and best people, 80-90% of the startup fail. So that's the reality. So they're taking such a huge risk. So obviously ROI become their key sort of metrics whenever they're locating the fund. But I think to the point that I think we're mentioning from your talk as well, because many of the activities a company do, as they're trying to be net zero, in the long run, economics actually work in favor of the company. That may be a fixed cost, there may be a CapEx involved initially, but in the long run, particularly growth stage companies, if they're really starting to go net zero from get-go, then their switching costs will reduce because they're already used to that sort of system and operational structure. So in that perspective, yes, I think there is a lot of VCs that are looking at it. Even if they're not impact investor, pure growth stage investor, they're looking at it because you can bring down the cost of operation as you scale. And I think net zero is going to contribute.
Very nice, thank you. So Harsha, I have a question for you. Like, what do you think from education perspective, like the educationalists and they can introduce in every courses and every, sessions, which will educate our students in this domain so that, they can work towards net zero?
I think so. The topic of net zero or sustainability is sector agnostic. So be it engineering, be it IT, or be it healthcare, it is applicable everywhere. And we need to introduce these kind of modules straight from the schools to the mid-school and higher graduation. And right now, although we are focusing on working professionals, but sooner or later we need the next generation.
So that is what made you to start your institution, so that, you felt that the institutions are not doing enough to educate our students in,
also the working professionals, because even I was never introduced to these topics in my college days, and I learned it on the ground as we see the coming, as we see the importance right now. So I started in 2010, but I never got educated in these subjects.
What do you think, Kristen? What should we do for, starting it, engulfing on our students from early stage? And
so, when I start there in business, what we say is, if you want to become sustainable, then your business processes have to become sustainable, right? Only if your business processes are sustainable, then you can become a sustainable company. So that means also from an education perspective, it has to be part of every subject. So if I'm an industrial engineer, right, I have to understand how do I design something in a sustainable way, right? If I'm studying something else, I always have to include, what is sustainability, the sustainable aspect to it. Not just if I study finance, it's not about the finance number, it's also about the sustainability in finance, right? So every subject will has sustainability be included in there. So it's maybe not a good idea to have it as a separate subject, right? If you have a separate subject, that's how it was in the past, right? You had a department, they were responsible for sustainability, move it there, then you're good. That's not true anymore, right? It has to be embedded everywhere. So that means also it has to be embedded in the curricula of each of the different subjects.
So you mean each of the courses should be defined on, keeping in mind or sustainability?
Yeah, I think when the courses are developed, we also there's a new aspect to it, right, which needs to be included in the course. Yeah.
That's good. Thank you. So what do you think about government? Like, is government playing enough role, or are they like in Europe? Of course, they're doing, but what about in other parts of the world? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I can start with that. I think we always have all this right COP25, COP26 and stuff like that going on all around the world. See, one way to look at it is we always say government is not doing enough, and sometimes we say, oh, government is trying to regulate way too much, let the market decide, let it be organic. But at the end of the day, I think the way to look at it is more like public-private partnership, I would say, not just leave it to one party, because a lot of that will come through that. And government, in terms of facilitation, right, making some policies, regulations like penalties and fines, like some countries have, those are some of the sort of guardrails that it can put. And I think they are doing in that direction, but there is always a lag time. Like, you know, the technology takes over, or the industries take over, people's behavior change, and the government start to intervene. There is always a lag time, so you could deal with that. In terms of doing anything radically different than what they're doing, if that's the question, then I would think that it's probably better to kind of look at everything in a more sort of a, because see, industries are looking for growing the shareholders' value, right? Because the CEO is an agent, basically, of sale. So that is how that incentivizes them. Now, the question is, how do you reward and create those incentives, right? Across public enterprises, private enterprises, and things like that, bring in thought leaders from different perspectives and sort of think about it. I'll just kind of, you know, I haven't dealt a lot of the government side, but
if they're like, I mean, the proper policies, can you do more, or they can do more? So
yes. I mean, yeah, I think in terms of policies rollout, I'm pretty sure Europe is far ahead in sort of clean tech and sustainability and all that. But I think there is a lot that is being done, actually, that is being done. That's my opinion. But I just want to draw one analogy, though. For example, 20 years ago, we're talking about CSR, right? CSR was a big corporate social responsibility. In that, being green, having a green tag was considered fancy and trendy at that time. A lot of companies gave up. I mean, government had a lot of rules and policies around it, but they gave up. Because it was always viewed as, just like you were saying, in education, sustainability department, okay, keep it in the economics, a cost center. So similar in the corporation, CSR was a cost center, okay, just to look good to the outside. But then they started thinking, let's do strategic CSR, how we can convert CSR into a profit center, right? Maybe there is a fixed cost involved initially, but in the long run, economics is actually profitable. And Coca-Cola and few Walmart, they started to kind of implement some of those. And when they saw that, okay, being green, doing some, you know, plantation activity, wherever this, you know, created a gigantic warehouse and stuff like that, in the long run, it is actually feeding into their bottom line as well. Then it becomes win-win for everyone, and they will continue to do more. So they're incentivized. Similarly, any policies and all that, if you're looking into that angle, and when you're trying to satisfy all different parties, we have to see like how we're incentivizing all the system on which the KPIs are measured. And can we make a strategic net zero in that case, just like you were saying, rewarding the board members, you know, share and things like that, the net zero, we're able to bring it down before certain years or certain quarters. You know, how are we then, you know, distributing that bucket to everyone, that they feel incentivized one way or the other, whether it is in terms of promotion, in terms of you know, shareholder agreements to companies and things like that. So along that line, I would just think, but I don't know much about like how government actually formulates these policies.
Exactly. Like in a similar line, do you think, you know, Christian, like, I mean, are there unintended drawbacks in pushing net zero too much? Like for big companies, you know, like you have given examples, they can look for employee promotions and those kind of things. But small startups, small companies, how do they do that? Like, I mean, can also like are there unintended drawbacks for that?
And that is a very good question, right? So, I mean, on the one hand side, we definitely say that we have to push net zero because of climate change and potential negative, the negative consequences associated with it. On the other hand, if we push it too much, like from a regulatory perspective, then in particular like small companies, right, might really have a problem to be compliant, right? There is a financial burden to be compliant, and maybe even higher if you're not compliant. So can every small company really afford that, right? And that's where maybe also governments might come in, right? Where they might provide programs which help smaller companies to be compliant, because the overall goal to become net zero is not something we should abandon, right? So that is what we need to achieve, and the timelines are short. So therefore, I think that's where incentives, support for small medium companies to help them in their journey to become net zero. I think that would be required.
Yeah, some allocation of, I think, dedicated funds towards that.
You being an impact investor,
Yeah.
do you do some kind of,
Yeah, so I think, so there are in the US, I can tell you, even at a county level, there are funds available throughout the country. From state level, definitely, and from federal level, there is a plenty of opportunity along the line. Because any startup that is working on emerging technology that is very risky and not extremely rewarding, at least till date, the current date for investors, government has lots of programs. There are small business innovation research programs. There are statewide grants that they can do match of funding. If you're able to get it from another source, they give you the match of funding. And then this sort of initial spark, they're doing it. Can they do more? Yeah, of course. There is always that outcry to do it more. But also like small ways government can do things. Like, for example, I'll give you an example of Tesla, right? So Tesla cars, when you're getting like 7,500 tax credit, you can buy a 100% battery car, not just Tesla, 100% EV car. And then the state government puts another 2,000 tax credit on that. And then they realize that, okay, there are certain parts in certain models of the car that is coming from other countries that, for whatever reason, whether it's a supply chain issue, political, geopolitical, whatever issue, then those models especially are not getting tax credit. So it is a way a government sort of creating and facilitating that to dictate what an industry is going to behave and what sort of cars they'll produce, and also how consumers are going to consume. Now, as a result, what is happening is, okay, people when they are making those decisions and they're mapping out different pricing of cars, and they're looking at it, okay, this 2,000 extra, this 7,000 extra actually make a big difference. Why would I buy a Model Y versus X or X versus Y and things like that? And then the industry gets the signal, oh, this is the most selling car right now, for whatever reason, and then they go more. And why is it? Okay, can we find another technology that is cost effective and we don't have to depend for this massive supply chain?
You're creating a sort of
Exactly. So it's kind of.
Maybe I want to briefly add, if I may. Because you asked about the government, right? So here in the US, right, we have the Inflation Reduction Act, right, from the Biden administration. That's a huge amount of money which is put in place, and although it's not in the name, but it's really for sustainable initiatives, right? And we have worked with some of our customers who got grants from those programs, and are now trying to see, how can they apply them to make their operations more sustainable. So.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting. So, audience, do you guys have questions for our panelists?
I'll ask one. From an impact investor standpoint, right? Typically, if you're an investor, pretty much you're looking for a good ROI, 10x, 30x, whatever. When it comes to evaluating a deal, what comes first, the impact, or is the ROI, or is it a combination?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So, the definition of impact investor is a little blurry, because if you look at most of the time, investors invest. They're not charity agency. They're non-profit either. But an impact investor definitely one of the big criteria to make those sort of selections and due diligence processes. What are your sort of values? How are you measuring those metrics as impact? For example, state level, government level, they have their impact fund. They look at more at job creation, like how we can make it equitable. So not everybody is moving to the cities. Can we create microeconomies in rural areas, for example? Can we put some agri-tech there and stuff like that? Some other impact investor might look at it as my criteria. There are actually quite a few impact investors who are very heavy on net zero and sustainability technology. And they look for startups, particularly where they can plug and play into the operational mechanism of some of those. Like, because not every company is equipped to reinvent themselves to kind of go towards net zero, but they might be able to outsource some activities so other companies can actually go and provide them some operational services to kind of how they can actually bring their net zero goals. So there are startups that actually plug into that space. And I think if the way, the agenda of COP26 was agenda to be met, you actually at the same time will see there will be a resurgence of a lot of startups into that space. So I would think give yourself like 3-4 years time, and we would see a lot of startup in that space, and not just impact investor, by the way, even the growth investors are going to invest in those companies. Because coming back to my point earlier, once how CSR becomes strategic CSR, similarly net zero is no longer a cost center, it's actually going to be a profit center. And when that happens, a growth investor will look at, oh, I missed the boat, might as well start investing. So what they do is generally create a portfolio, and they want to have a few where they're looking for a long-term play, impact investor, sustainable, which is not giving me a guaranteed 30x or 20x ROI, but maybe in the long run, 2x, 1.5x, still higher than treasury tax or bonds and other investments, other monetary instruments. And then you allocate certain amount of fund for growth stage companies, so your liquidity is always there. And we always have to look at it, right, from their perspective. If they have to win, if they want to put money into impact investing, you have to see what will make them win as well. So what makes them win is the liquidity. So they have one fund gets over, gets liquidated, they have an exceed 1 or 2, they get seen, okay, 20% get allocated to the impact, 30% get allocated to their core technology, they're looking at it, and 30% goes to growth stage. So I think we always have to look at it, what works for them so that they stay in the game long and they don't go bankrupt to make us successful in the end, right? To make other entrepreneurs successful.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Prakash, Kristen, and Harsha. We have to respect the time and invite our impact entrepreneurs to present about their product here. So thanks for this.
Thank you.
I would like to present something to you. This is a small gift from our side.
Talking about sustainability. Thank you. This is going to absorb some carbon dioxide from the air. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, one of the point that, one of the point that actually I thought when I was coming to actually bring is a lot of time when we go and listen to net zero sustainability. Most focus is how we can reduce CO2 emissions and all that, if you see typically. But it's also time to think as a startup entrepreneur, what sort of technology we can actually bring that is going to absorb the CO2 from the atmosphere. So because of course we cannot live in a paranoia, we cannot stop industry, we cannot do overnight. The laws consumption, but how we can actually develop technologies or even policies in the government level. If you're building a warehouse, okay, you've got to plant 1,000 trees or 10,000 trees around that. So startups also should start thinking about what is the next. For example, one simple example I'll tell you, Microsoft recently invested in a big company, for which is looking at out of Colorado, there is opportunity to what's the next. So that company is developing bioconcretes, selling and all these buildings, right, food, cloth, and etc. These are the three basic necessities of human needs, and they're the three most CO2 emitters to the economy. So if you can start controlling, it's a different way of making this concrete, but it's sort of bioconcrete right there. It's a huge amount of value, sustainable. I think companies are building their cloud storage facilities. They need all the real estate space. They're going to start using this sort of concrete and develops.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So I'll Mariam.
You can invite Manoj and then Mariam.
Okay. So I'll invite now Manoj from Think Tommy. He is the founder of Think2Me, and he will share some presentations and words with us. Manoj, do you want to?
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I was not really prepared for this, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that we're working on. So I currently run a school where we provide innovation and entrepreneurship courses. Right, I teach in Philadelphia at a couple of universities. I also teach in South Korea. I do have a little bit of a background in startups. I've done about 7 startups myself, all different types of technology and things like that, including one with SAP a while ago, right, where we were engaged with SAP. But one of the things just kind of recently, about 8 months ago or so, I had the opportunity, because I do a lot of work in South Korea. And as I mentioned, I teach at the universities there as well. About 6 months or so ago, we got this opportunity to work with a whole bunch of green tech startups out of South Korea. And so they came here, we assigned them some mentors to work with them, people in that space. And one of the things that we saw with these companies that came here is that South Korea has a huge problem at least in my opinion, they have some of the best technologies in the world, but they cannot commercialize them. Right, so that is one of the biggest drawbacks the country has. But when you looked at some of the companies that came here and presented their ideas, it was incredible what they have built. But so the government pours a ton of money into R&D, but they don't pour the money into marketing and basically taking the market. So when they came here, we got an idea to meet the different companies and things like that. And then about a couple of months ago, not a couple of months, just 2 months ago at CES, if you take a look at the CES, believe it or not, a third of the companies that came to CES were from South Korea. 1/3, right? So then again, all the companies are R&D, right? Just any university, government offices, you name it, they were all there. But one of the organizations that we were tasked to work with is a company called K-Water in South Korea. And if you take a look at what these companies have built, they have some like really, really incredible technology. So one of them, for example, it's like a little tennis ball, right? It's an electronic tennis ball. When you wash clothes, you drop it in the washing machine. It just washes your clothes. You take it out, it runs about 5 or 6 times, you charge it, and you put it back in again. Right? It creates some type of an electronic soap. So that's one. Then there was another company, for example, they clean the carbon from your rooms and things like that. People put plants. This is a little device that's like a humidifier, and within like an hour or so, it can clean the entire air in that room. But all these things, they just build this, and they sit on the shelf, right? Because they have no way of commercializing. So myself and a couple of us are getting together right now, and we're creating like a venture studio model, where we're trying to bring some of these innovative technologies, obviously starting from South Korea, but other countries as well, bring them here to the US market, help them with their marketing, sales, business development out here, and probably look at different ways of getting them funded and things like that through the government initiatives and some of the other programs that are here. So this is, for me also, I have to admit, I'm pretty new into this space, so I'm trying to figure out all the different buzzwords and things like that, but I'm getting there. But some of the people on the team who are with me, they come from that background, so that has kind of helped us kind of put this together. So we're in the stages of now hoping within the next 3 or 4 weeks to actually go present this to the South Korean government and say these are the ways that we can help bring some of these technologies and basically commercialize them on a global basis. So that is something that we're working on. So. Yeah.
So how exactly are you getting those innovative technologies? Are you introducing them to the venture capitalists here, or with the governments to present their products? Is it a tie-up some kind of?
So the thing is, it's kind of funny. I've worked in South Korea for about 9 years now, right? If you meet any South Korean startup, they have 2 goals. 98% of them say the same thing. We want venture capital in the US market, and we want to sell our product in the US market, right? That's their vision, that's their goal. So one of the things that we have here over the years and things like that with some of the people I work with, and so we have a network here of from investors and salespeople and marketing resources and things like that. So the whole idea is to leverage the network that we have with the governments and things like that. So when we identify a technology and we figure out the business strategy and how the company can actually work here, then it would be assigning somebody to them and to work with our network of people here. First, not to just go and say, here's a great idea, put money into this, right? That's not the idea. But the idea is, let's build your business, let's figure out how you can generate revenue from here. And then when you're ready, then we'll take you to venture capital.
Very interesting.
Yeah,
Like
so-
helping commercializing.
Commercializing. And then down the line, we have talked to a couple of people here, obviously, with some of the deep pockets here, whether down the line, not now, but maybe a year from now, whether we create our own fund as well to kind of fund some of these companies that would come.
Do you have any success stories or?
We have done it with some other companies, but now the focus is, I mean, like I said, for me personally, it's been green tech, fintech, healthcare, and all that kind of stuff, right? So now we're saying, let's not worry about all those technologies. Let's just be green tech or, you know, what that's what we call it, or climate, and just focus all our efforts on this now, because obviously we are serving a purpose as well if we can focus.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
What's the main problem behind the lack of commercialization?
It's you know, I mean, it's interesting because the universities and things like that, like I said, I teach at some of the universities, things like that. It's kind of funny. The mentality of them is just purely R&D, right? So it's all about engineering. So, and I have this stand, it's not a joke, but it's true. So I always say, if you went to a South Korean company, whether they have 10 people or whether they have 100 people, for example, to give you an idea. If you went to a 10-person company and said, I can bet how many engineers you have. Say about 8.5 of them are engineers. Who is your salesperson? That's the CEO. Who is your marketing person? Oh, that's the person who works at the reception. Right? If you went to a 100-person company, the numbers are exactly the same. They have 85 engineers and about 15 people that do everything else. So they take incredible amount of pride in R&D, you know, and just building technology. They haven't been able to kind of get that commercialization piece right now. And they just think that, oh, there's a lot of money here in the US that they're going to pour money into R&D. But that's not the case. I mean, here you're looking at a business model as opposed to R&D. But there are some incredible technologies that they put up.
So since you're working with quite a few university-based spin-offs and technologies, how are you dealing in terms of licensing, technology transfer type of things?
Well, we have to kind of figure it out. So when we work with the universities and we run startups and we work with them and things like that, we kind of let them run it. Right, to be kind of, if it's in South Korea and if they're selling to that market, then they have the legal structure to manage it. But if they come here, for example, so a lot of the venture type models here is that typically these companies will need to do what they call a flip, right? So they will have to become a US entity with an R&D office in South Korea, and then try to use that to build it out here, right? So we have a couple of people who know how to do those flips and things like that. We haven't done it yet. But that's kind of in the planning stages of that's how we would propose to do this.
Thanks, Jim. Very interesting.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Mariam. So now Mariam will introduce us to Tsunami Bioplastics and have the stage too.
Go through the slides of,
I go to the slides like this here.
So I will just share it.
My co-founder is South Korean,
Oh, really?
but he didn't grow up there as much. He grew up in Bangladesh. That's where we met.
Yeah, that's.
But I didn't know those things you said about South Koreans.
When you want to change the slide, you can just click this for changing the slide.
Yeah, up and down?
Yeah, up and down. Simple.
Okay. The page down thing. Is it all on there? Is it a full screen mode? Huh? I'm not familiar with pulse.
Let's start.
full screen. Here. Usually here. Oh, just a second. Full screen? Yeah. Okay, then I'll just go like this, like that. Okay. Okay, so thank you for being here and thank you for inviting me. I wanted to zip through a few slides because we all have talked about net zero, things like that, but I wanted to introduce my little company as well down the line.
So Mariam, I would like to introduce yourself. Why you are doing this and your past, you have had like 5-7 startups before that.
Yeah, I've been in many startups and I'm going to talk about that. So we want to get, in my startup, we want to get from that to that. As you can see, that's like a lot of plastic pollution, and that is so much greener and cleaner. So I picked this title, One Path, because this is just one path, and I'll show why and how we're getting there. So net zero is a target. We've talked about this, and main thing is to reduce the emissions and capture the carbon. Is net zero a reality? In my opinion, the glass is full. It's not a half full. It's not a half empty. It's full. I try to keep really positive. Being an entrepreneur is not easy. It's challenging, but you have to keep at it and you have to be resilient. But getting to net zero requires all hands on deck. We have to do everything that we possibly can from different angles. One side is, as we discussed, carbon capture, but also we have to reduce emissions. Fossil fuel companies are causing emissions. Human beings are causing emissions. So my path is solving the plastic pollution problem. Decided, okay, we have to do something about this. I used to have a solar energy startup and we made several solar systems. We sold them in 8 different countries in Africa. We sold in Pakistan and in Bangladesh. And we were doing really well till solar home systems were not that important. And then that went into being more rooftop solar, floating solar, all these large solar projects and solar farms. But we focused on the villages. Then I said, okay, let's now focus on plastic pollution because we have a problem there. Let's talk a little bit about the plastic pollution problem. These are just some statistics. We know plastic waste is everywhere. Recycling isn't really working. 91% of plastic is not recycled. In Germany, they have like 7 recycling bins. In America, we have like 3, right? But even then, we have a problem. In South Asia, where I grew up, as well as where I've been spending a lot of time for the past several years, we don't even have recycling at all. So we have microplastics now, which is causing a lot of problems, and I'll talk about that also. So the statistics are not looking too good. A little bit more about the oceans, just some images showing that in 2109, when we're all going to be somewhere else, that same plastic bottle is going to be around. This is an issue in our oceans, our rivers, the land. So where's plastic use? Primarily packaging industry, in construction, in the automotive industry, and so on. It goes on where it's used in a lot of different spaces. Just to give you a little idea, you are familiar with these everyday items that are used, right? We have straws and plastic bags and even balloons. And we've got plastic that is like even in our cutlery that we use for picnics or just want to, use these one-time things. So does it degrade? Does it degrade? Does it disappear? No, it doesn't. Fishing lines, 600 years, plastic cups, 60 years, plastic bottles, 450 years. The statistics are quite alarming. And then we have microplastics. All those big plastic pieces, they break up break down into tiny little microplastics. And now we have a nanoplastics issue, even smaller scale. A little bit about microplastic, right? Microplastics, these are just the tiny bits. And as I've said here, you can imagine a grain of rice. That is what we're talking about, these tiny little pieces, the bags, the bottles, the straws, these eventually do break down. And now we're talking nanoplastics, we are inhaling it, it's in our clothing, we are eating it, it's in the food, it's in the baby's diapers. I mean, it's everywhere. And it has been found on all continents. So then we go to single-use plastic. This is the biggest issue. So I decided to tackle this issue in particular. Single-use plastic, we're talking about like the one-time cups and the bags and the bottles and things like that. So yes, of course, we can reduce plastic waste. There are many ways to reduce it. In my little company, we have a graphic artist who helped us with a lot of these images. And so he came up with this, we worked on this together, that, here are all the different ways that you can reduce. Don't use this, use that, try to avoid this, things like that. So we have ideas, but we really do need sustainable solutions. We need green solutions. So how do we do that? Use alternatives. When I decided to start the startup, went around talking to people, everybody was saying that, okay, you don't want us to use plastic bottles and bags and straws, etc. Well, what do you want us to do then? That's all that we have. Then the bulb went off that we need to provide alternatives. That's what's missing, because if we provide them with something else that they can use, then that's what they're gonna utilize for a sustainable planet. And came up with the bioplastic alternative. This is something which is different, which is plant-based. A little bit about bioplastics. They're from plants, they're from nature, so they return to nature, they biodegrade, and these are very good alternatives because it has a lower carbon footprint, and we are not using up fossil fuels. We would have an alternative to that, so we don't need to be creating more emissions. Helps us get better to net zero, making our goals to 2030, going to our goals for 2050 and such. So we decided, my company, that let's use a unique plant solution. And that plant has been in my family business for more than 203 years. I'm familiar with the plant because I grew up partly in South Asia, in Bangladesh, where this plant grows. It's called jute, and it is a golden fiber, and it is a fantastic plant. It is not as widely consumed. It is very high in cellulose. It is currently used to make carpets, rope, gunny sacks in which you put coffee, wheat, rice, etc. As well as we decided that, this is so versatile, why don't we use this in a different way? So right now you find people using jute to make bags or shoes or garments, and we said, let's use it in a scientific way. So I put together a team and shipped out jute to them. And I had people in Germany, France, Canada, etc., put together this team of scientists and said, work on this, let's see what we can do about this. And they said, it's a fantastic plant. This works really well. We can make so many products with this. And we came up with 7 products. Of course, when we went to potential investors, they thought we're nuts, because 7, you should have like 1, how the typical VCs think. So we said, okay, we'll narrow it down. Let's go and see what's up with the competition out there. And when we looked at the competition, we found that we are achieving all these boxes, checking off scalable, low price, environmentally friendly, and such. And then you have, of course, petroleum-based, fossil fuel-based, where there are a lot of issues. And then you have the vegetable base. For example, people are using starch from the corn, glucose from sugarcane, seaweed, etc. And here we have a plant that isn't that widely known to be edible. So we would not be taking away from what human beings consume. So we thought this is a perfect plant to use. Of course, we have hemp on the other side. People are trying to do things with that. And they're not exactly from the same family, but they are similar. but hemp has its issues with the whole CBD and all that. So we said that we have access to jute, we can make products from it, we've tested it out, let's go for it. So we decided to come up with different kinds of products. We narrowed it down to 3. So our main focus has been on pellets. In place of what you call polypropylene, polyethylene, fossil fuel-based pellets, we decided to use plant-based pellets. And we created a special pellet so that it goes in the exact same machine, injection molding machines that plastic manufacturers are already using. So they have these machines in their factories, and they are putting these fossil fuel, they're creating these emissions, they're causing plastic pollution. So why not use plant-based pellets instead? And we saw that from this, we can make household goods, which is like, hundreds of different items, toys, shopping bags, flexible packaging, and also our products go in the cosmetics industry. So, I mean, the list goes on, but, when we were going after investment, said, why don't we narrow this down so that we can target only, certain markets? And we focused on these markets, and we came up also with a biodegradable film, which can be made into shopping bags, as well as a gel that goes in the paint industry, pharmaceutical, cosmetics, etc. And all this we made with a biodegradable plant. On environmental and social impact, my team and I, we believe that we must make net zero a reality. I mean, that's what we are focused on. It's been very challenging. We've been bootstrapped. We have worked very hard. I've put in hundreds and thousands of dollars of my own money into this startup, and we are in manufacturing, which is very challenging. So when we went to potential investors, they said to us that, hey, you're pre-revenue. Come back to us when you're post-revenue. So this is the chicken and the egg situation. It's like, okay, we are going to be, post-revenue when we have customers. And to get the customers, we need the machinery. So we ran into all kinds of problems. And then finally, thanks to women's groups that I'm part of and very active in, as well as several climate, clean tech related groups, we landed some customers. Interestingly, these customers we landed want to focus on the sustainable development goals. And where are they based? Primarily in Europe. We didn't find American customers to be so forward-looking as we found the Europeans to be. Also, we have customers in South Asia who would like to do something because they are also getting a lot of pressure because policies are changing. But we found the Europeans really want to make a change. So we are working with France and Germany and the Nordic countries because, they are implementing changes. Their policies have changed. The EU has been enforcing rules, get to net zero, follow the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, things like that. And we follow several of these goals, most of them obviously related to clean water and climate and sustainable cities and things like that. And yes, we know about the issues of threatening and about temperatures as well as the greenhouse gases. And so that's why the whole plan to go for the net zero. And we want to make a social impact in a positive way. Just want to throw a little bit about an awareness campaign that we have been running. We called it Unplastic Bangladesh. No such term like unplastic exists, but we called it that because we said, hey, we want to come up with something different. We're so tired of plastic pollution everywhere. So what can we do? Something better for the environment. And so we partnered with the youth group. I work with a lot of youth, and we partnered with one particular group, and they chased after this, and they worked so hard, all of them volunteers. And there are 8 huge districts in a country called Bangladesh, which is near India. And we targeted all the districts. And within a few weeks, more than 500 people signed up. It was really rapid. All they had to do was find an area where there's plastic pollution, take a before photo, clean it up, take a video while cleaning it up if they want, or at least provide an after photo. And so it was a before and after. This was to create behavior change and to create awareness. After that, these people, they came back to us, these 8-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 80-year-olds, and they said, oh, now every time I see a cup, a bottle, a bag, I think about it, that like, oh, I cleaned that up at one point. I did something about it. I took action. And so this campaign has been extremely successful. I personally funded this campaign, as well as working with these volunteers. They funded their effort and their time. We provided everybody with a gift bag, everything environmentally friendly in that bag. And now we have been approached to rerun this campaign again. We're trying to expand this campaign. If anybody has any ideas, we'd like to do this elsewhere, as well as I'm supporting some other campaigns, because we feel in my startup, it's not just that we want to make products and we want to make sure that people use products that are not, fossil fuel based, and something that's plant-based, better for the environment. But at the same time, we have to educate people. We have to create awareness, because like they have to know what they're getting into, what is this world that we're leaving behind, especially for the youth. And so, as I said, I work with a lot of youth, and I constantly tell them that you need to vote people out of office who are not doing something for you, because the future that we are leaving them is really sad unless we make these changes. And we need to make rapid changes, as you all know from the other talks on net zero and the videos that were shown, that we need to take action. We need to take climate action. And so that's it. Small acts, they change the world. So everybody does their part, and that's what we're trying to do. And we keep at it as entrepreneurs.
Thank you so much, Mariam. It's a great presentation.
Yeah.
So I would like
Yeah.
Lovely, I'd like to invite Ian.
Yeah. Or if anybody has any questions, if not, that's fine too.
How long does it take your bottles to decompose?
Oh, we're not making bottles. We're making pellets. So we will make bottles eventually, yes. But right now we're making these pellets. And so we're not talking thousands of years. But at the same time, for example, if we're making, we just make the pellets, and then the plastic manufacturers make the toys, furniture items, household goods, things like that. But, you don't want it to decompose immediately on the pellet items, right? So eventually they will biodegrade, they're compostable, they're biodegradable, they're better for the planet. But it's not something that is going to disappear in like, say 30 days or something like that. But given the conditions, they definitely will. On our biodegradable film, it's almost immediate. So, there, yes, after you're done with those plastic bags, and right now we're focused on making marine biodegradable, because we polluted our rivers and oceans so much. Our multinational customers based in Europe told us, hey, we want to see marine biodegradable. And so now we're doing a third pilot project based on that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So I'd like to invite Ian, from President of Sustainable and Business and for Sustainable Development in Menlo College, to give us a thank you note.
Yeah, I don't have much to say, but thanks everyone for turning up. My name is Ian. I'm a student here at Menlo together with Elisa, and we're a few students who run the Business and Environment Club here, which is a sustainable-led initiative where we essentially try to educate and encourage students to work within sustainability, regardless of major or interests. And we've had some guest speakers at Menlo before. We're also involved in Atherton's environmental committee and had some company visits. So yeah, we're trying to get the students engaged. Most students are not here today because it's a Friday and don't have class. And a lot of the students are athletes as well. So they're out traveling. But yeah, thanks again for showing up. Very informative session. And if you guys have anything to add regarding.
I think you guys, it would be a good platform to collaborate with the students and also for the industry, in this initiative. We have a huge list of impact entrepreneurs and investors as well, so we can, connect them.
And we found out about this just a week ago, but for the future, we'd like to collaborate in a more, profound manner. So,
Actually, in Menlo College, do they have a innovation and entrepreneurship link?
yeah, there's an innovation entrepreneurship major.
We also have the innovation center.
And there's an innovation center. I can show you after if you'd like. It's in one of the other buildings. Yeah.
Maybe since it is the end of it, shall we come together for a group picture and make some memories before we leave?
The speakers in the middle, or
Yeah,
how do you-
everyone in the middle, and let's remove that slide from the background.
Just close it.